Well, welcome to Soulform, everybody. I'm just glad to have you whenever you decide to join us. Uh, Today, I want to pick up on one of the themes that we have been discussing in our Soulform live context, and it was inspired by an art project that one of the members of the Soulform live community wanted to do this week, and that is she was suggesting that we begin with an art project that each of us starts to journey into this kind of experience of artistic expression. And then at one point in the process, we pause our articulation of our kind of creative expression and we hand on our art to the next person and we receive the art of the person next to us and we pick up where they left off. And we hand off the work that we do to a neighbor, and they pick up where we left off. And so it goes around the room. Each of us kind of putting our expressive self onto paper, and then handing that off to someone else to begin to build on it and expand on it, or to change it and push it into a different direction. And so it goes around the room. It struck me as she was describing this experience that we're going to try out how appropriate it is for the kind of content that I want to talk to you about today. And that is this notion of how to be religious in this, what we've defined as the second axial age. It's a term, the axial age, that we've talked about before, but it's a term that reminds us that we're at this this next turning point in our understanding of ourselves as human beings. And that because we're at another turning point, there is a requirement that we might recast our idea of what it means to be religious within this new framework. And I will tell you, as someone who has spent 30 years now in spiritual communities and reinforcing in many ways the paradigm that was birthed out of the first axial period, that while I've been committed to that journey, I also am committed to trying to understand how religion works for our time, right? How does the soul's journey manifest in today, in lives today? And because we've seen such an exodus in so many ways from those who have been able to at one point find meaning in that previous paradigm and now no longer feel that they're religious but rather self-identify as spiritual or whatever however they identify, right? That there is a longing to figure out or feel like you fit in to this sense of whole. And while that's been defined for us so many times by religious structures of the past, how do we do that today? So that's what I want to explore a little bit today, is this kind of way in which you might begin to think about, if that applies to you, right? Ways you might think about, how do I create the kind of internal tools and perspectives to guide me into a different way of being religious in our time, or spiritual in our time, or fostering a sense of soul. Today I'm going to pay attention to one of the authors I love, a guy by the name of Don Cupit, who's getting quite old now, but some of his writings I think are brilliant. And he says that there is a way to be religious in this second axial age that can create a kind of spiritual resonance that mirrors the actual reality or perception that we have of who we are in the universe, how we fit into the matrix of the complex systems of life, some way forward that is more accessible, so that you can feel like you're having an experience of soul that resonates with the reality that you're actually experiencing in life, right? So it's not a reality that you're inheriting, that you're then trying to fit your spirituality into, but the actual experience of life itself can manifest a pathway to spirituality that's quite robust. So let's start on this little journey and see where it takes us today. Don Cupit uses a quote by Nietzsche that says, the world is a work of art." Think about this. The world is a work of art that is continually giving birth to itself. The world is a piece of art that is continually giving birth to itself. For Don Cupit, he understands that as we experience the world in which we live, that experience itself allows the world to come alive for us, he uses the term become bright and maybe shine, right? That our experience of the world and our engagement with the world is the actual thing that begins to create the wonder of the world. So it's not as if the world, has this sort of objective reality that we're trying to apprehend, but in the experience of it is the actual enlightening of it. And I love that notion. It's a call really to each of us to say, look, journey deeply into the experience of life, and that journey itself begins to brighten the experience or to enlighten your experience of it. That's where the magic happens, right? So the magic does not happen in the way it did in the old axial period, and that was kind of based on, you can kind of use the kind of the framework of the Greek philosophy, right? In the old axial period, there was some ideal or some objective reality to which we were trying to attach our lives to or meaning to. So there was some external entity, whether it be a god or an ideal that was out there. You think about kind of Plato's notion of the ideal chair, right? So every chair in the universe, right, is based on some ideal of chair. And so there is some perfect chair out there that we're trying to attain, but we're all kind of living in shadow chair world, right? But there is an ideal chair out there. And there is some sense of that kind of perfect object that we're all trying to attain. I think sometimes of the first time I saw Michelangelo's David, and my idea of what the human body should look like, right, is grounded in that ideal, right? I want to look like that, right? I have this sense that that's what you're supposed to look like, right? So we have this that concept is really birthed out of this first axial period, that there is something out there. But for Don Cupit, he said, no. We have to push beyond this idea that there is a metaphysical reality. We got to push beyond the idea that there is something out there. And so Don Cupit would say, look, think of it as whatever's out there is empty. It's not as if there's something there. The world itself, the experience of life itself, is all there is, right? It's very contingent. It's very fluid. It's like a piece of art. As we engage it, it comes to life, kind of way. I know that's confusing, but I think there's some meat there. How do we experience spirituality in a world beyond the kind of the metaphysical construct, that there is something beyond the physical realm that we're experiencing, that we're trying to attain or connect our lives to? And so Don Cupit will talk about life beyond the idea of a God who is out there, pulling levers and making things happen, that most of the population has moved beyond that notion of God, but rather thinking of the sacred or the divine as just part of the fabric of the way in which we create meaning together, right? That might be a more appropriate way way to think about it. Let me use a quote by Don Cupit that might help clarify this. And I think this mirrors back to the art project that we started out with. Don Cupit writes this: "We are always inside the continuous shifting world of human exchange, which gives us language and then shapes our thinking. This process of exchange continually produces and maintains the whole developing culture, a consensus of meaning about truth and reality, values, and so forth. These are the basis on which we live. In this way, life, like we used to say about God, is the place in which we live, move, and have our being, physically, socially, and even spiritually. And the way people now talk about life is becoming really the religious object, right? Life becomes this religious object. Life becomes the first layer of the non-self. It envelopes us, claims our allegiance, carries us along, guides us and teaches us, and gives us our fate. It is, for Don Cupit, life itself that invites us into being beyond just the individual, right? I am part of the experience of life, and I participate in the experience of life through my senses and the way in which I articulate that experience, but I'm also part of this kind of ongoing consensus building, right, conversation that is the creative narrative in which I live, move, and have my being. And so rather than attaching my idea of my spiritual life to some external reality, I'm literally embedding it in the experience of life itself, the everyday moments of life itself, the exchanges I'm having with you, the conversation I'm having with you, the way in which I'm inheriting your artwork, articulating my own and then passing it on to another. That is the spiritual experience for Don Cupit. I think it's just a lovely way to kind of reframe the landscape on which I can shape my soul's journey. In many ways, we are embraced by life as we embrace it. That is the great calling. We then devote ourselves, right? You can apply religious language to it. We devote ourselves to the very fabric of life itself, this full expression of a drama that is always unfolding, shifting our attention to the way in which we engage life as the birthing place of the poetry or the artwork, right? Can you feel that energy? It's a different kind of energy than the old energy of trying to get it right or master it all or find the right path. It's not that at all. It's more like a commitment to being embedded in the very fabric or the patchwork of the experience of life with all that brings. And then the language along the way in which I engage it, is the space in which my soul ignites or my spirit catches a fire and becomes the flame that warms my soul and is an expressive place for me. And that's all there is. Right? That is all there is. I don't have to push beyond that. For many, I think, and this happened for me along the way too, maybe it's happened for you, a shift to that mentality can sometimes feel like we're all alone, right? That there's not this benevolent divine being that's watching out for us, or some cosmic energy that's, driving this whole show that we're trying to align ourselves with, it can feel kind of alone. And I remember when I first started exploring this, how empty I felt, because I had entrusted my full sense of my soul's journey to an external idea of God or the divine, and now that I had to let that go for a while and see what that felt like, and it felt a little bit scary and unnerving, to be honest with you. But the reality is, it is not a lonely place. It is the place where you can drop into all of the connecting moments and experiences that are birthed as you feel part of this matrix of life itself, right? That your little artistic expression belongs here alongside of all the other artistic expressions that belong here, that you are woven into the very fabric of this experience itself, and you find your meaning inside that weave, inside of the way in which that fabric interconnects together, both with other humans and with the biosphere and with the moment in time in which you live, the cultural realities in which you face, all of those challenges and all of the glory and all the opportunities that's there. That is the fabric in which you find your meaning. Don Cupit, to finish, puts it this way. What is happening then to the religious object, this way in which we used to think about having an objective reality that we're all kind of working towards? Does there need to be an object at all? Does there need to be an objective or an object at all any longer? Maybe life and language are no longer dominated by a single religious system in the old way. Instead, the sacred has become scattered. The sacred has become scattered. So many people find themselves feeling religious about personal relationships, about morality, about love and children, nature, art, life itself. And when religious feeling has become so widely dispersed across the whole field of culture, we should surely consider giving up the idea that before all else it needs to be focused around the worship of one supreme religious object. If so, we may come to think of being religious as simply a response to life. And in that response to life, what are the sort of things that bring it brightness, that awaken it for us, and that awaken it for others? And in that moment, we can find that places of compassion and tenderness and communication and acceptance and joy and challenge and sorrow and grief, all that matrix of life can come together to be the birthing place for the way in which art continually reinvents or births itself along the way. So that's what I'm going to leave you with that. To maybe consider as you struggle or explore what spirituality might look like for you, that you can allow yourself the freedom to give yourself fully to the experience of life itself, and see if that might be the place where your sense of soul can manifest. Don Cupit, in the end, calls it solar living. It's a way, I think, of connecting this idea of enlightenment to the brightness we experience as we open our eyes and see the world as a very landscape that invites us into our deepest selves. And we see others manifesting their deepest selves in that same experience as well. What joy for Don Cupit that brings to each and every moment. All right. So I'm going to leave it there for today and invite you to chew on that. Obviously, you can reach out to me via an email or some sort of post in the response of the Facebook feed that we put this on to let me know what you might be thinking about that. But we're going to experiment with that kind of model of how we see our spirituality as a collaboration with the artistic folding that is literally what the way in which maybe world expresses itself, and we are part of that, right? Along the way. All right, thanks for just hanging out for a little while. If you're interested in Don Cupit, his book that I've used for this talk is called Emptiness and Brightness. It's an older book, but I think it carries in it some great insights into how we might think about being spiritual in this new axial period where the absolutes have faded away and we all live in this contingent relationship with one another and the biosphere that holds us all. All right, be well.